Yes, that's me. Back in 1940, when I was 13 years old, had just won a marble tournament, excuse me, in the seventh grade. Stand there shaking hands with the runner-up, and that was my life's probably biggest achievement up to that point in time. You can say a marble tournament? Yes, marble tournament. Let me give you a little background on this, and then I want to give you the what's really at the root of this photograph, which appeared in the Idaho Daily Statesman newspaper about 100 miles to the north in the city of McCall, Idaho. And at that time, I had just been living in McCall a short time. In 1939, my folks divorced, and my mother and my brother, Bob, went to live with our Grandma Lambie in Boise, Idaho. She was a caretaker for an elderly gentleman there. She had one room in his big home, and so Mother and Bob were going to live in that room with Grandma during the time that Mother completed her training as a secretary in the secretarial school. Because after the divorce, she needed to get an income going that could provide for the three of us. No such thing as government assistance at that time. So the family chipped in, and my Uncle Ted, who lived up in McCall, Idaho, he and his wife Betty offered to take me into their home for, I think it was about a full year period, starting at the end of the summer in 1939 and going up into 1940. And of course, moving from my hometown where I lived for previous 6 years was not an easy transition, as it's not easy for most kids whose folks go through divorce. But my uncle Ted and Betty were gracious and willing to help, and I had a young cousin, their son Stan, who was there at the home, just the four of us all together. But it was kind of difficult, as most kids find out when you go to a new school and you try to adjust and want to be accepted, and things aren't going too well and you're kind of homesick. And in this case, I was missing my dad, who was no longer around. I never saw him again for 40 years, so he was pretty much out of the picture starting at that period of time. And so into this new school, and they're going to have a marble tournament. Well, marble tournaments were kind of a big deal back in those days. We didn't have television, had very little radio, so you made your own fun games, and marbles were something that was done all across the country. Boys and girls played marbles, more boys, I guess, than girls, but it wasn't unknown for girls to play as well. And so people get pretty good shooting marbles, and there's a technique to shooting them that makes you better than the average. I won't demonstrate that. I'll show you something later on, the difference in how you do that. But at any rate, I decided if I really wanted to be accepted, or I felt that I needed to anyway, I needed to win that marble tournament. But unfortunately, I was not a good marble player. When you play marbles, you play to lose or play to win. You try to win the other person's marbles. And the good players get big bags of marbles. I mean, they fill these bags up full with marbles in them if they're really good. And I lost my marbles most of the time. I wasn't that good. So how was I going to win this marble tournament if I was such a lousy marble player? Well, I decided I knew there was a better way of shooting the marbles. Most times shooting marbles, you shoot with, I don't know if I can show it on here or not, shoot it with your thumb right on the thumbnail. and you push it with your thumb. However, there's another way where you use your knuckle, and you can get much more leverage when you put the marble on your knuckle and shoot. It's a little more difficult to do, but that was the way that the big boys did it. The guys are really good. They use their knuckles. So I decided I was going to change. I was going to move from my thumb pushing the marble to using my knuckle to shoot that marble out. And at home, in my uncle's home, every afternoon after school, I began to set up the marbles in the corner of the room there and began to shoot with my knuckle. More and more accuracy, more and more distance, more and more speed, more and more. I was doing pretty good, but I wasn't sure it was really enough. So what else could I do? Well, interestingly enough, my uncle and aunt had placed a Bible in my bedroom that I had upstairs there. And I think they placed it there deliberately in case I ever got curious, read it, because I hadn't read the Bible. I don't think we had a Bible in our home in Cascade. I don't recall that, ever seeing it. If we did, it was just an ornament that sat on a table with maybe a record in there, people who had been born or died, or I don't even remember that. So the Bible was foreign to me, but I'd learned somewhere that maybe the Bible could help me. So I'm thinking about that, and well, okay, give it a try. I'll start reading this, and God, if there is a God, that was a question in my mind. I had no assurance there was any higher power or God around listening to whatever I might do or say. But I began to read in the Bible, starting in Genesis, and continued to practice in the corner there of the room with my knuckle shooting. And then came time for the tournament. 7th grade, 8th grade combined tournament. And so I entered the tournament, and lovely afternoon as I recall, and kids are shooting and I'm shooting. I win the first one, not by a big amount, but I win my first match. Then I win my second match. It doesn't seem like the other kids are shooting as well as they normally did. Then I win my third match, which is the semifinals, which brings me then up to the finals. And there are the two of us now shooting for the championship of the 7th and 8th grades in McCall Public School. And the other fellow's shooting, and if he makes this next shot, he wins the tournament. And a thought crosses my mind. What if he reads the Bible too? Well, I don't know if he did it or didn't, but he missed his shot. Then I took careful aim, and if I make this next shot, I win the tournament. And bing! And I got it. And I won the tournament. Now that's a small event. 7th grade, 13 years old. But for the first time, it occurs to me that there's a cause and effect here. And that somehow God, there is something called God, and he observes when you pay attention to him. And that was the beginning of my understanding of spiritual things. Now, there were other things happened while I was in McCall. It was actually turned out to be a good year. I learned to ski. There were Angan brothers, Alf Angan, who established Alta Ski Resort out of Salt Lake City, up at Alta. He and his two brothers Corey and Svori were all three of them living in McCall, Idaho that winter. I don't know if they're there the whole winter, but one of them, Corey, took it upon himself to teach all the kids in the school how to ski. And sure enough, I learned to ski, and stayed with me like riding a bike. Years later, I could ski and skied in college. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And I also had my first job while I was there, which was being a caddy at the golf course. And I love that. Walking around with the men, listening to them talk, carrying the bags, no big deal. And them paying you to do that. Lovely afternoons, lovely mornings, beautiful place. And that golf course in McCall, Idaho. Pine trees, just beautiful. And then another event took place that in retrospect was significant, like winning the golf tournament. There was a lumber mill on the edge of the lake there in McCall. Beautiful place. That whole area is beautiful. Today it's a resort city. Town. People come there from Boise, Nampa, Caldwell, Ontario, all that whole area to spend their summers, at least vacation there. But in the wintertime, ice forms on the lake. It gets really cold. In fact, it's supposed to be the snowiest, deepest snow of any place in Idaho, any town in Idaho. And that spring, I was down by the mill and saw the logs in the pond out there. And I felt pretty agile. I got down there and I started jumping from log to log in this pond. And of course, the pond is quite deep. The lake is underneath it. Call it a pond, but it's deeper than just a small pond. And cold water, the ice had just gone out on the lake, and it was really bitter cold in that water, close to freezing. And I was moving from log to log and blithely doing great, just jumping right away, doing fine. And all of a sudden, I came to the end of the logs and my momentum was carrying me forward and I fell in the lake. And trying to get onto a log that turns as you try to get onto it out of the water is not easy. And there I was in that near freezing water. And the problem was I did not know how to swim. I had not learned at that point in time. Fortunately, and you might say coincidence, there was a man working not far away from where I was. I hadn't been particularly observant of him, but he saw me go in the water. And he came out and he had the skill to be able to fish me out of the water, pull me up on the log, and then they took me into the mill where the fire was going, burning the sawdust in the mill where I could stay warm until my uncle came for me. Now, I didn't know how to swim, freezing water, falling in the pond. A man happens to be nearby. Coincidence? No, not now. Years later, as I look back on that event, I think God was there too. He was helping me stay alive. And that wasn't the only time that happened. But the reason I raise these, what you take for granted, what we take for granted, what I took for granted, as coincidences, well, it just happened sometimes, and more so now, I believe. God has a hand in those things. He's paying attention. He's listening. And especially if you're someone who prays, ask God to bless you in being able to do what's right, not praying for things like a bicycle or something like that, but praying that God will guide you, that he will help you understand, that he'll bless you in your studies, bless you in your relationships with other people. And if you listen and follow the kind of subtle inspiration that comes, like my deciding to read the Bible, that was my choice, but I did it. And because of that, God had an entree into my life at age 13. May you be blessed the same way. And think about it. What may seem to be coincidences, what God may be doing for you. Keep it in mind. Hey, good talking with you again.